Today I will be responding to the claim that stricter firearm laws and regulations would significantly decrease firearm-related deaths in the United States. My opponent's secondary claims were that 1, that countries with a lower percentage of households with firearms have less firearm-related deaths, 2, that stricter firearm laws and regulations would decrease massacre shootings in the U.S., and 3, that the availability of firearms increases the chance of firearm-related suicides. My response claim is that the number of firearm-related deaths in the United States would stay the same despite stricter firearm laws and regulations. My secondary response claims is 1, that lowering the number of legally possessed firearms will not lower the number of firearm-related deaths. To support her first claim, my opponent stated that stricter firearm laws and regulations make it more difficult to possess firearms. Therefore, stricter firearm laws and regulations would reduce the percentage of households with firearms and thus reduce the number of firearm-related deaths in the United States. According to Arlene Egby Jr., an employee of the National Youth Gang Center, more than 50% of homicides in the United States are gang-related, reaching 59% in large cities such as Los Angeles in 2001. The National Institute of Justice states that surveys of offenders have found that they may steal or borrow guns. Most, however, acquire guns off the street through the illicit gun market. This means that most gang members acquire guns illegally with which to commit their crimes. This means that in the U.S., at least over 50% of firearm-related deaths are committed with an illegal weapon. My second claim is that massacre shootings in the U.S. could still take place despite stricter firearm laws and regulations. In the BBC News article that my opponent used, Timeline of U.S. School Shootings, that summarized 20 school shootings in the last 10 years. 16 out of those 20 shootings were committed by underage teens or children. These children could not have bought and legally owned these firearms. These firearms were either taken from their parents or obtained illegally. There is no law that could prevent an adult from legally buying a gun on the basis that their child might use it to commit a crime. This means that these children would have still had access to these guns, whether they got them from their parents or obtained them illegally. So most of these shootings could have still taken place despite stricter firearm gun regulations and laws. In conclusion, with most of the guns with which murders are committed being obtained illegally, and most of school shootings being done by children or teens who could not own a gun, the number of firearm-related deaths would not be significantly decreased by stricter firearm laws and regulations.
Thank you. All right, well, you listed the main and secondary claims very clearly, and on your first point, basically you're developing a counterclaim on the effectiveness of such legislation. Now, this is because the advocate presented a pseudo-policy argument, you're allowed to be able to present a pseudo-policy response here. This is basically an argument about the effectiveness of the law, whether or not it would be workable. And I thought you had a pretty clear explanation about the causality issue of crime being related to gangs, and then some good statistics that suggested that the gang members obtain their weapons for the most part in illegal manners. So the inference here being that additional laws are certainly not going to change, since the laws are already being broken by these gang members in the first place, so it's unlikely to change the frequency with which guns are being used in those kinds of criminal activities. And I think you could maybe make that argument a little bit stronger with some information about the illicit gun market, or how many guns are already available, or the impossibility of getting rid of access to the guns that are already available. It probably wouldn't hurt either to draw comparisons to other things where we've attempted to restrict access, and criminal elements still manage to get access to things that there are restrictions on. And if they're the ones causing most of the harm, then obviously there's not going to be a change. You got the same kind of argument on the issue about the mass shootings. Now, I did notice that all of your argument largely depended upon the notion that there's school shootings that involve the mass shootings, and you've got a good statistic here: 16 out of the 20 school shootings that were looked at, the kids had to get their guns from their parents, or they got them illicitly. So it's basically the same argument here, that a law wouldn't make any difference. I'm not sure that the advocate limited their argument to just school shootings. In fact, they may have been talking about all kinds of mass shootings, and it's just the school shootings that they use as examples. It depends. The longer this argument went on, I think we could probably get a lot more explanation of it. That would be the first thing that, if I was the advocate, I would be responding to if I was doing a resubstantiation here, and say, well, that might be true. Still, 25% of the cases in schools, it was true that we could have restricted this and maybe have prevented it, but that you've ignored that a lot of these mass shootings occur in places where people do obtain their guns perfectly legal. And the example that jumps in my head immediately is the guy down in the Long Beach area who went in and shot up his ex-wife's salon and killed those 8 people and that sort of thing. And that's a mass shooting, and that's one of those things where somebody got legal access to the weapon. So like I said, this would be one of those places where, if we were doing the debate, there's going to be additional argument on it. Here, the argument just kind of terminates, and I would have to make an evaluation based on the 2 points that are being presented. I thought you did a nice job trying to summarize the arguments on this issue. Then there's no response to the issue of suicides, and I thought that seemed a little bit odd, because the advocate did seem to develop a pretty substantial point on that. So, and you also cited it as one of their supporting points at the beginning of the speech. Without addressing it specifically, I think that kind of creates a problem for you. It leaves your flank open, so to speak. Oops, I forgot to put on the other pant leg or something. You need to make sure that you've got everything covered there. All right, thank you.